So year sevens, we're going to carry on looking at understanding the writer's craft, and today we're looking at understanding how a writer can use contrast to emphasise something about the appearance of a character. So we're going to look at an extract from The Witches. Apologies that it's slightly dark on the screen, but I'll read that to you. I think you should be able to see it well enough to be able to read it. All the women, or rather the witches, were now sitting motionless in their chairs and staring as though hypnotised at somebody who had suddenly appeared on the platform. That somebody was another woman. The first thing I noticed about the woman was her size. She was tiny, probably no more than 4.5 feet tall. She looked quite young, I guessed about 25 or 6, and she was very pretty. She had on a rather stylish long black dress that reached right to the ground, and she wore black gloves that came up to her elbows. Unlike the others, she wasn't wearing a hat. She didn't look to me like a witch at all, but she couldn't possibly not be one. Otherwise, what on earth was she doing up there on the platform? And why, for heaven's sake, were all the other witches gazing at her with such a mix of adoration, awe, and fear? Very slowly, the young lady on the platform raised her hands to her face. I saw her gloved fingers unhooking something behind her ears, and then she caught hold of her cheeks and lifted her face clean away. The whole of that pretty face came away in her hands. It was a mask. So we've got a question on the screen right at the bottom. What clues are you given to make us think that there's something suspicious about the women? And what are the effects of the ellipsis and exclamation marks in lines 14 to 17? I want you to have a think about those, but then we're going to complete this next activity. So I'd like you to have a go at copying and completing the first column of the table. So we need to look at details in lines 1 to 8, which help form an impression of the woman. Okay, so we're looking at the first 8 lines. So if we just go back to the previous screen, there we go. So you've got the first 2 paragraphs we're looking at, and we just need to pick out any details that help to tell us something about this woman. So you might start off with, she was tiny, from line 4. She was tiny. Then you could also have 4.5 feet tall. So we're just looking for details that give us information about the woman. Okay, so that's what you're doing, just the first column at the moment, because we haven't read the information for the second column yet. So give yourselves about 10 minutes, draw out that table and complete any information that you find out about the woman. Okay, so details that you could have had in that first column. We've already mentioned that she was tiny, 4.5 feet tall, looked young, 25 to 26, very pretty. She had on a rather stylish long black dress that reached to the ground, black gloves up to her elbows, and wasn't wearing a hat. They're the details which we should have had in that first column. Okay, let's move on then. And we're looking at the second part of this story, where she's just taken off her face, which was actually a mask. As she took off the mask, she turned sideways and placed it carefully upon a small table nearby. And when she turned round again and faced us, I very nearly screamed out loud. That face of hers was the most frightful and frightening thing I've ever seen. Just looking at it gave me the shakes all over. It was so crumpled and wizened, so shrunken and shriveled, it looked as though it had been pickled in vinegar. It was a fearsome and ghastly sight. There was something terribly wrong with it, something foul and putrid and decayed. It seemed quite literally to be rotting away at the edges, and in the middle of her face, around the mouth and cheeks, I could see the skin all cankered and worm-eaten, as though maggots were working away in there. There are times when something is so frightful you become mesmerised by it and can't look away. I was like that now. I was transfixed. I was numbed. I was magnetised by the sheer horror of this woman's features. But there was more to it than that. There was a look of serpents in those eyes of hers as they flashed around the audience. I knew immediately, of course, that this was none other than the Grand High Witch herself. I knew also why she had worn a mask. She could never have moved around in public, let alone book in at a hotel with her real face. Everyone who saw her would have run away screaming. So, as we said at the beginning, that was taken from The Witches by Roald Dahl. So we've already filled in details from lines 1 to 8 to give us the impression of the Grand High Witch when she was first seen. Let's have a look now what we're going to do. So firstly, we need to complete the second column of the table, okay? So let's just have a look what we're doing there. So the second column of the table, we're filling in details in lines 21 to 24, which help to form an impression of the woman, okay? So lines 21 to 24, which is the first part of the second paragraph that we've just looked at. Okay, so you can see it there. So it starts off with that face of hers down to bottom of this line here. Okay, so you're filling in any details from those first 4 lines of that second paragraph that now give us more information about this woman. So in that column, you should have filled in things like frightful and frightening, gave me the shakes, crumpled and wizened, shrunken and shriveled, pickled in vinegar, fearsome and ghastly sight, something terribly wrong with it. That's what we should have in that second column. Let's have a look at the next 3 activities. So we'll go through them first and then you can have some time to get on with these. Complete the following sentences. In line 5, she's described as looking quite young, but in lines 22 to 23, her face is described as being. So you need to pick something out from lines 22 or 23 that shows a contrast with her being young. So contrast means a big difference. So first of all, she seems quite young. Now, how is she being described that makes her sound anything but young? Second part to question 2. In line 6, we're told she's very pretty, but now... So again, we need to find something from that second part of the description that contrasts with her being very pretty. So showing the exact opposite of her being very pretty. Question 3. One of the reasons many children and adults love to read Roald Dahl is because of his descriptions of the absurd and grotesque. Absurd means very strange, grotesque is disgusting. Reread lines 23 to 27. Which words does the author use to get across a grotesque image of decay? So grotesque, we said, means disgusting. Decay means like things that are rotting. We think about when fruit starts to go a bit rotten, don't we? It goes soft and squishy and mouldy and bruised. So think about the words and phrases that Roald Dahl uses in lines 23 to 27 to get across that really disgusting image of decay to describe this Grand High Witch's face. And our final question. In the first part, Luke says she didn't look much like a witch at all. Look at his reaction to her in lines 29 to 30. How does the author emphasise the contrast in Luke's reaction? So how does he show that real change in Luke's reaction to her in lines 29 to 30? So you should have done question 1 on here, completing that second column in the table. You should now give yourself about 10 minutes to have a go at answering questions 2, 3 and 4. Off you go. Well done.